You might think this is a somewhat strange title. I titled it, I Think, Therefore He Is. And I think you will notice that that is a twist of what someone else said. And we'll talk a little bit about this. Now, what is this going to be all about? You know that the world is experiencing a fair face of Roman Catholicism, and Vatican II has been described as a breath of fresh air. And unfortunately, many of the people who belong to the very group that I belong to seem to think the same thing. And so I deemed it appropriate to investigate this issue, to see if Vatican II indeed was a breath of fresh air. It is basically an attempt of mine to once again just point everyone in this movement to have another look, to make sure. Because it is the excuse that is given why we should be in this relationship with these other churches, and why we should believe that there's been a change of heart with regards to religious liberty. And I've heard statements on our television programs that indeed there's been a change of heart, and that people who do not see it are nothing more than conspiracy theorists. I know that I'm harping on this subject, but I want to make a statement on this issue so I can move on to bigger things and better things. I think, therefore, He is. Pope Francis and Peter Faber, kindred Jesuit spirits, comes from the National Catholic Reporter, and it's September 20, 2013. You see, we're pretty up to date here. We're not too far behind, right? Pope Francis' statements of late on solidarity with the poor, on the need for community, and on refocusing the church's energies away from a narrow focus on sexual issues. Let's get away from all these things that are happening that seem so negative, and who cares who's what in the zoo anyway? May sound shocking to some. This is much different tone than the image of the papacy in recent times. In Paris, Faber, who was a co-founder of the Jesuits together with Ignatius Loyola, also encountered Ignatius Loyola. He tutored Ignatius on Aristotelian philosophy, while Ignatius formed Faber's spirituality. So I'm just showing you the roots from their own sources. Under Ignatius' guidance, Faber mastered the spiritual exercises, and in 1534 he was ordained a priest, and later that year he and 6 other men, including Ignatius and Francis Xavier, took vows as the first members of what became the Jesuit order. So the spirituality that we have in the Jesuit ranks and the philosophy that we have doesn't stem from the Bible. It stems from Greek philosophy, and it stems from a spirituality which is totally different to that which is described in the Bible. So here we have another way to worship God. By the way, the beast that came out of the sea in Revelation chapter 13, what body did it have? It had the body of a leopard. And a leopard is which philosophy? Greek philosophy, because the leopard is Greece, according to Daniel chapter 7. If we go back to Abignay, History of the Reformation, Inigo, which is the short for Ignatius Loyola, instead of feeling that his remorse was sent to drive him to the foot of the cross, persuaded himself that these inward reproaches proceeded not from God, but from the devil. And he resolved never more to think of his sins, to erase them from his memory and bury them in eternal oblivion. Luther turned towards Christ. Loyola only fell upon himself. Visions came ere long to confirm Inigo in the convictions at which he had arrived. He did not seek truth in the Holy Scriptures, but imagined in their place immediate communication with the world of the spirits. Luther, on taking his doctoral degree, had pledged his oath to the Holy Scripture. Loyola, at his time, bound himself to dreams and visions. And chimerical apparitions became the principle of his life and his faith. So in the spiritual exercises, he would focus on an icon, preferably Mary, later the Black Madonna, which became a symbol of the black dress and everything that we see in the Jesuit order. And then he would focus so long and repeat over and over and over certain phrases until he actually experienced this communication with God. So his communication wasn't via the word, it was via an experience. In interview, Pope Francis sets new direction for the church. Yes, there's no doubt that Pope Francis is new, different, reformist, open. The papacy marks a clear, if quiet, break with the public emphasis of so many church leaders over the last decades. So he had this interview with the Jesuits interviewing the Jesuits, publishing in the Jesuit journals, tell you that everything has changed. There's openness. Openness to what? To more sin? Pope Francis calls for social justice against unemployment. He is the Pope of social justice. I want to know what that means. I need to know what does this stand for? What does it mean, social justice? After all, after Vatican II, the papacy is for religious liberty, justice for all, peace and harmony amongst men. Let's first go to the Jesuits and Ultramontanism. From the 17th century, Ultramontanism became closely associated with the Jesuits, who defended the superiority of the popes over councils and kings, even in temporal questions. This comes from very reputable sources. Within the Roman Catholic Church, Ultramontanism achieved victory over conciliarism at the First Vatican Council with the pronouncement of papal infallibility, the ability of the Pope to define dogmas free from error ex cathedra, and the papal supremacy, supreme, full, immediate, and universal ordinary jurisdiction of the Pope. Other Christians not in full communion with Rome declared this as a triumph of what they termed the heresy of Ultramontanism. Now this word Ultramontanism has an interesting history. Ultra, other side, Montanism, mountain. They used to refer to it, the Protestants, as that one other side, the mountain. But before that, the others who weren't in harmony with the papacy were also by the papacy called Ultramontanism, those on the other side. But finally it became to mean all power in one man. And the Protestants said, Ultramontanism, the man on that side of the mountain, this is heresy, there's no such thing. Can all power be in one man? And eventually, Ultramontanism was of course accepted at the Council of Trent, but at the First Vatican Council, it received a stamp, because the Pope was called infallible by decree. So now he was the Ultramontane, the man in control. The Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were God, and the vicar of God got its stamp of approval at the First Vatican Council. Now in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, it says, "And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am, has sent me unto you." So now we have two I ams. One who is infallible, sitting in Rome, and we have one who is the creator of the universe and the creator of everything that there is, who says, say, I am sent you. Isaiah 46 verse 9, "Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me." So there can't be two gods. Declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times the things that are not yet, saying, "My counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure." And I must admit, in my own life, having been a Roman Catholic, that this verse was very true in my case, because it's prophecy that proved to me who the true I am is. Because only the true I am can tell you history in advance. And so, he proved to me that he was the only I am, because he told me ahead of time what was going to happen, and therefore, by checking prophecy, I can see that he is telling the truth. So, the serpent is the one who said, "Ye shall be as gods." And the serpent said unto the woman, "Ye shall not surely die, for God does know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." So on the one hand, you have only one God, the I am, and here you have a promise that if you follow in disobedience, you will also be God, and you will not die. This is the office of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Article 1. The Church teaches that every spiritual soul is immortal. It does not perish when it separates from the body at death. And just to make sure that that hasn't been forgotten by the Roman Catholic Church, I will quote Pope Benedict XVI's Caritas in Veritate, where he says, "Man is not a lost atom in a random universe. He is God's creature, whom God chose to endow with an immortal soul and whom he has always loved." So there's no change in doctrine there. And as we see, this is what the serpent said, not what God said. Now, is this just an error of thinking? Or does Rome actually know that this is what the serpent said and not what God said? What does the Bible teach about immortality? Shall we ask Rome? This is the New Catholic Encyclopedia. The soul in the Old Testament means not a part of man, but the whole man as a living being. Similarly, in the New Testament, it signifies human life, the life of an individual conscious object. Recent exegetes have maintained that the New Testament does not teach the immortality of the soul in the Hellenistic sense of survival of an immortal principle after death. So they know that the Old Testament teaches that there's no such thing as the separation of the one from the other. The soul is the whole man. And there's no such thing in the Scripture of immortality that is a Hellenistic doctrine. Again, we come to the leopard beast. It's Greek philosophy. It's not God philosophy. So Rome certainly qualifies in believing the message of the serpent. Pope Leo X, on Monday, December the 19th, 1513, issued a bull in which he declared, you know, I like this word bull. It has such a double meaning. "We do condemn and reprobate all who assert that the intelligent soul is mortal." And this bull was directed against the growing heresy of those who denied the natural immortality of the soul and avowed the conditional immortality of man. Now, you know what to me is fascinating in history is that Martin Luther, and here's the man who translated the Bible, and he must have taken great pains to understand the meaning of the words, because how are you going to translate something like that? That Martin Luther, on October 31, 1517, published his defense of his, or in his 1520 published defense of these articles that he pinned to the church door. Luther cited the Pope's immortality declaration as among, quote from Luther, those monstrous opinions to be found in the Roman dunghill of decretals. He had such a way with words, did Luther. Don't emulate Luther in this, please don't. Archbishop Francis Blackburn states, Luther espoused the doctrine of the sleep of the soul upon the scripture foundation, and then he made use of it as a confutation of purgatory and saint worship and continued in that belief to the last moment of his life. I could give you many more quotes on the issue, but I'm not doing a study on death. I'm looking at a principle here. Martin Luther believed in soul sleep until the resurrection. Does his church believe that today? No. But they call themselves Lutherans. I don't understand why. I would ask the Lutherans, please, to go back to what Luther taught, because it was based on the Bible. William Tyndale is the other one who translated the Bible into the English tongue. British Bible translator came to the defense of the revived teaching of conditional immortality. So he too, grappling with the translation of words, decided, well, this means that the soul must sleep until the resurrection. And he had a major confrontation with Thomas More on the issue, who was the papal legate. And he said, Tyndale said, all souls lie and sleep till doomsday. And in 1930, Tyndale responded vigorously, saying, and ye, talking to Thomas More, in putting them, the departed souls in heaven, hell and purgatory, destroy the argument wherewith Christ and Paul prove the resurrection. And again, if the soul be in heaven, tell me why they not be in as good a case as the angels be? And then what cause is there of the resurrection? And then he pressed his contention further, and he said, nay, Paul, referring to the Bible, thou art unlearned, go to Master More and learn a new way. We be not most miserable, though we rise not again, for our souls go to heaven as soon as we be dead, and are then as great joy as Christ that is risen again. And I marvel that Paul had not comforted the Thessalonians with that doctrine, if he had wished it, that the souls of their dead should rise again. If the souls be in heaven in great glory as the angels after your doctrine, show me what cause should there be of the resurrection. That's how the Reformers argue. And this is the man who gave the world the English Bible. Do the English churches believe what Tyndale taught? Yes or no? No. They prefer to believe what the Pope teaches. The Pope knows that the Bible doesn't say it. He's proved it in his own encyclopedia. But he says, I don't care. I believe what the Hellenists believe. I, after all, have a body of a leopard. So, as far as the doctrines are concerned, they are strictly with serpent language. Pope abolishes state of limbo. And the BBC asks, how can limbo just be abolished? He didn't abolish purgatory because that would be a major problem, because that started the Reformation in the first place. So purgatory is still there. You can still be blasted with a Bunsen burner. Now, how can he do that? Well, the Pope's will stands for reason. He can dispense above the law and of wrong make right by correcting and changing laws. It appears he can also change doctrines as he pleases. Catechism of the Catholic Church, 2nd edition. The Word became flesh to make us partakers of the divine nature. For this is why the Word became man, and the Son of God became the Son of Man, so that man, by entering into communion with the Word, and thus receiving divine sonship, might become a son of God. For the Son of God became man, so that we might become God. The only begotten Son of God, wanting to make us sharers in his divinity, assumed our nature so that he, made man, might make men gods. Now, again, just to make sure I didn't take this from an obscure source, because many accuse me that I use obscure sources. So I hope that the Vatican archives of Vatican.va are not obscure. This comes from their own webpage. This is what they teach. After all, if he has the power to change doctrines based on his reason, then he has elevated himself to the position of a god, right? Well, this is fascinating. And he quotes, of course, Irenaeus and Thomas Aquinas and all these bright people. So who is Thomas Aquinas and where does this doctrine come from? Thomas Aquinas lived at a critical juncture of Western culture when the arrival of Aristotelian corpus in Latin translation reopened the question of the relation between faith and reason, calling into question the modus vivendi that had obtained for centuries. The Catholic Church has over the centuries regularly and consistently reaffirmed the central importance of Thomas's work for understanding its teachings concerning the Christian revelation. And his close textual commentaries on Aristotle represent a cultural resource which is now receiving increased recognition. Again, what is the body? Greek. It's Greek philosophy. It's not biblical philosophy. Natural law in Thomas Aquinas, by the High Middle Ages, two strains of interpretation dominated the natural law tradition. One, the order of nature, identified with the Stoics and Ulpian, focused on the physical and biological structures given in nature as the source of morality. The other, the order of reason, identified with Aristotle, Cicero, Gaius, focused on the human capacity to discover in experience what befits human well-being. And Thomas accepted both. The common understanding of the law is defined by St. Thomas as an ordinance of reason promulgated by competent authority for the sake of the common good. Now you have to take care of this one. Now the writer here is Richard M. Gouler in his book Reason Informed by Faith, and we'll talk about this author in a moment and about his book. So an ordinance of reason promulgated by competent authority, who would that be? For the sake of the common good. Now, we have to work this one through. Now, let's have a look what natural law means. Natural law doesn't work on the premise of what the word says. Natural law works on what is natural in nature. I want to explain to you what this mindset leads to, and you being steeped in Christian theology, Protestant Christian theology, might take offense. But let us see where this leads us. This comes from the same source, Richard M. Gouler, excellent source, Jesuit source. Sexual activity, this is how sins are classified according to Thomas Aquinas. Sexual activity excluding procreation. Thomas classifies them in an order of ascendant gravity. Masturbation, marital contraceptive intercourse, homosexuality, and bestiality. So there are grades of sin. You know, Roman Catholics believe in venial sins and mortal sins and bad sins and not so bad sins and, you know, all of that stuff. Now, it gets worse from masturbation to bestiality in ascendant gravity. Now, these are sins against biological nature, contra nuterum omnis animalis. They are graver, please note, they are graver than the sins which do not exclude procreation. So sins which can lead to procreation, which is the aim of nature, are not so bad as sins that cannot lead to procreation. So these are not so bad, these sins. In ascendant degree of gravity, fornication, adultery, incest. This is interesting. You see, those sins can lead to procreation. Now, let's take this logic a little bit further, because they don't take it further here for very specific reasons, obviously. Rape. Can that lead to procreation? So is it a greater sin than masturbation or a lesser sin? Help me? It's a lesser sin. It would be a lesser sin. Because by natural law, it can still lead to procreation. And if you look at this, then marital contraceptive is a greater sin than would be rape. Can you get the logic of that? This is incredible. So this is how you start thinking when you start defining things by natural law. Now, let's go to René Descartes. He was a philosopher whose work, La Géométrie, included his application of algebra to geometry, from which we now have Cartesian geometry. He was educated at the Jesuit college, etc., etc. He entered the college at the age of 8 years. Just a few months after the opening of the college, he studied there until 1612, classics, logic, transitional Aristotelian philosophy. That's what you learn at the Jesuit college. And he was a Jesuit. Now, what is your thinking on this issue? Descartes was a major figure in the 17th century continental rationalism. He is perhaps best known for the philosophical statement, I'm not going to say it in French because I'm sure to mess it up, I think, therefore I am. Found part in the fourth of the Discourse in the Methods. Now his moral philosophy. He, being a convinced rationalist, clearly states that reason suffices us in the search for the goods we should seek, and for him, virtue consists in the correct reasoning that should guide our actions. So God has got nothing to do with it. I think, therefore I am. He's elevated himself to the position of God, and the morality will come from his mind and not from the mind of God. Descartes shifted the authoritative guarantor of truth from God to man, while traditional concept of truth implies an external authority. So an anthropocentric revolution, man is now raised to the level of a subject, an agent, an emancipated being equipped with autonomous reason. So in other words, the guarantor of truth is no longer God, but becomes man. I think, therefore I am. Now, in my thinking, having undergone this transformation of thinking, I would have to turn that around, because Satan is the master of reversal. So I changed it to I think, therefore he is, which I believe is theologically correct. Because I'm even capable of thinking, there must be a higher someone who has created me with that capacity. Is that right? So if I can think, that means he must exist. Because I certainly didn't make myself by myself. And if I take it all the way back to Adam and Eve, I have to ask the question, where do they come from? They didn't make themselves by themselves. And because they can think must mean that he is. But not in Catholicism. In Catholicism, I think, therefore I am. Martin Heidegger sums it up as follows. For up to Descartes, the particular subjectum lies at the foundation of its own fixed qualities and changing circumstances. The superiority of a subjectum arises out of the claim of man to a self-supported, unshakable foundation of truth in the sense of certainty. Why and how does this claim acquire its decisive authority? The claim originates in that emancipation of the man in which he frees himself from obligation to Christian revelation, truth, and church doctrine, to a legislating for himself that takes its stand upon itself. So, I'm the authority. So he was a rationalist. Now what does that mean? The principle or habit of accepting reason as the supreme authority in matters of opinion, belief, or conduct. That's a rationalist. So Jesuit theology rests on rationalism. It is Greek philosophy. It has nothing to do with biblical theology. Now, that brings us to this book, Reason Informed by Faith. And the author, Richard M. Gula, we've quoted him twice already, professor of moral theology, St. Patrick's Seminary in California. He says natural law is central to Roman Catholic moral theology. It is the kind of reasoning which faith informs. Perhaps the single most characteristic feature of traditional Catholic morality is that the church can teach a morality which is applicable always, everywhere, and for everyone, because it relies on the natural law as the basis for its teaching. So it lies in the I am principle. The advantage of using natural law is that the church shows great respect for human goodness and trusts the human capacity to know and choose what is right. Also, by means of appealing to natural law, the church can address its discussion and claims for the rightness or wrongness of a particular action to all persons of goodwill. Now, please note those words. We're going to get to them. All persons of goodwill. Not just to those who share its religious convictions. Now, again, I'd like to think about reason informed by faith. And because this is Jesuit thinking, and we have to, as they do, they say they have to tack learning with learning, right? So let's do the same thing. In my opinion, this is gospel reversal. And Satan is the master of reversal. Because reason informed by faith is a misnomer. There can be no such title if you're a Protestant. The only way you can title a book if you're a Protestant is faith informed by reason. But not reason informed by faith, because then faith is subject to reason. Whereas as a Christian, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Is that correct? Therefore, faith must be the primary, and you can augment your faith through your reason. You can look at nature. You can see whether there's evidence for a flood. You can see whether there's evidence for a creator God. You can look at the complexity of the genetic system, and you can say, my reason establishes my faith. But this is the other way around. This is Jesuit doctrine. This put man above God, puts faith as a lesser to a greater. So Satan being the master of reversal, I would like to propose that we should switch this round. Now, I just put the back cover of the book on for you to show you everybody who endorses it. James J. Walter, PhD, Professor of Christian Ethics, Loyola University in Chicago. Fascinating stuff. Richard A. McCormick, Professor of Christian Ethics, University of Notre Dame. Kenneth R. Hines, OFM, Associate Professor of Moral Theology, Washington Theological Union. William Spohn, S.J., Society of Jesus, Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley. So this book has the endorsement of the highest Jesuits in the field. And when a Jesuit puts out a book, you know that it has the endorsement of the general of the Jesuits as well, because that's how they work. So this is Catholic theology. We have to look at what this man has to say. John 15, verse 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me you can do nothing. It's not for nothing that we held a sermon like that just last night, because it's all part of the package. Luther believed that human reason is blind, deaf, senseless, godless, sacrilegious in its dealings of all God's works and words. So Luther said, our reason is fallen. Catholicism says, no, our reason is paramount. Everything else is subject to it. So here is a clash of ideologies. It's a battle for the mind. This is Richard M. Gula, and he writes, one of the great disadvantages of such an approach is that it can easily lead to handing Christian morality over to the moral philosophy, when religious beliefs do not really make a difference for moral claims. Okay, we should keep the religious beliefs subservient to the reason. The magisterium, that's the bishops, and the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church, has appealed to natural law as the basis for its teachings pertaining to a just society. Now, I just want you to run that through your mind again, a just society. That the sins which do not lead to procreation, are greater sins than the violation of personal sanctity. Are you getting what I'm saying? Sexual behavior, medical practice, human life, religious freedoms, relationships between morality and civil law. In any case, the development of natural law tradition among Christian thinkers is due not so much to the scriptures as to the influence of Greek philosophy and Roman law. That's straight out of the mouth of a Jesuit, right? We have to know where we are standing. He also wrote an article, The Way of Goodness and Holiness, a Spirituality for Pastoral Ministers. Gulala directs the readers away from viewing morality as a matter of action and consequence, what shall I do, to the concept of virtue, who am I, what do I want to become? So here is a striving to be good. Who else had that striving? And to do it on his terms? Cain. To the concept of who do I want to become is rooted in the ancient Greek and other ethical traditions. Over and over we come with this idea. This is not biblical, this is Greek philosophy. The focus is on the goodness of the actor instead of the good works done, as a spiritual journey is about holiness. Now you must understand this philosophy. We are moving up to holiness by using our reason and our own goodness to get there. A spiritual journey is about holiness. Gula then examines the 4 areas of ministerial formation: human, intellectual, spiritual, pastoral, that are common to the Catholic ministry formation. So here we start getting an idea of where this is going to. This is Greek philosophy. It's got nothing to do with the scriptures. They're quite clear about it. Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit, dreamed of humanity merging into God and each realizing his own godhood at the omega point. This belief has inspired many of today's New Age leaders, and he's the most quoted New Age occultist. And he was the spiritual father of the United Nations. Now, of course, for many years, the Roman Catholic Church would shout, "Oh, no, we don't want to read his articles and this and that and the other," so that people who get confronted with these ideas might believe the Catholic Church has distanced itself from his teaching. But I have news for you. He's the one who wrote the general convergence of religions upon a universal Christ who satisfies them all. That seems to me the only possible conversion of the world and the only form in which a religion of the future can be conceived. In his major work, Natural Law, this is Richard M. Gula writing again, the Jesuit, writing about a Jesuit. The theological investigation, Joseph Fuchs develops the line of thinking. He maintains that creation is intrinsically connective with redemptive incarnation, so that revelation adds nothing new to what we can discover of the material connective morality through reason. Natural law itself is graced. Therefore, the rational requirements of morality are the commandments of the Creator. Ooh, all right. So the natural law thinking of Roman Catholicism is graced. We don't have to worry about Scripture. We only have to worry about what the exponents of this morality have to say about it. And it is linked to the creation. It has a progressive. Teilhard de Chardin, his ideas went beyond the toleration expressed in non-overlapping magisteria, or the idea that religion and science need not conflict. Teilhard's union went far deeper than that. He believed that religion and evolution were inextricably linked. That as such, Christianity did not make sense without evolution. He first propounded the omega point theory that mankind evolves towards godhood. I'm showing you Jesuit thinking. Man is evolving towards godhood, abetted by Jesus Christ, making evolution a theological as well as a physical transition in form. And if you think that the Catholic Church has distanced itself from this, then think again. This is the Roman Catholic online article. Vatican spokesman Father Federico Lombardi said in July 2009, by now, no one would dream of saying that Teilhard is a heterodox author who shouldn't be studied. So we've progressed along the line. We can happily embrace this teaching as part of Roman Catholicism. How far does his thinking then go when it comes to the United Nations? Robert Mueller, who was the chairman for the Peace Party and the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, said, decide to open yourself to God, to the universe, to all your brethren and sisters, to your inner self, to the potential of the human race, to the infinity of your inner self, and you will become the universe, you will become infinity, you will be at long last your real, divine, stupendous self. So he's taken this philosophy, or he was a Teilhardian, and there is his webpage, Global Spirit. Welcome to Global Spirit. It seeks to inspire consciousness of the wholeness of the human family and the sacred tapestry of all life. Now, this is a fascinating philosophy. The wholeness of the human family. Basically, you are all cells. And the human family, as it were, is like an organism. And each cell has its place to play. But it cannot be independent of the body. It has to be part of everything and subject to everything. It's a wonderful philosophy, apparently. So there's a global consciousness that honors the wisdom found in the world's traditions, cultures, and disciplines. The awakening of global consciousness is a new and monumental event in human evolution. We've now progressed to the point where mankind can adopt this spirituality. And of course, it's mainstream now. A person like Eckhart Tolle, who speaks on Oprah Winfrey shows and etc., on our television media, makes no boast about it. He says, I know that I am. And he says, Jesus Christ was just another being like us. We are all God. Every single one of us is God. This is the same philosophy as the Jesuits have. And now let's go to Vatican II. Having established what Jesuit theology is, having established the basis of their morality and their thinking, let's go to Vatican II. Vatican II, here is Pope John the 23rd being carried into Vatican II's opening ceremony. When asked to explain his prayers and hopes for the council, he simply went to a window and threw it open, letting the fresh breeze wafting into the room express his intention in a single gesture. A breath of fresh air. Now, when I hear our spokespersons of religious liberty telling our people that Vatican II was a breath of fresh air, it requires a response. And since that was a public statement, this is also a public response. This was the great council that made ecumenism possible. This was the great possibility of reuniting the whole of Christendom. And it was a breath of fresh air. Rome had changed its view. No longer did you have to belong to the Roman Catholic community in order to be saved. You could be whatever you were. What a wonderful change of heart. Did Vatican II change the Roman Catholic position established at the Council of Trent, which led to the separation? Congregation for Doctrine of Faith, this is Vatican.va. This is Cardinal Ratzinger's argument on the issue. He became Pope, and he's the sleeping partner in the papacy today. Did the Second Vatican Council change the Catholic doctrine on the Church? The Second Vatican Council neither changed nor intended to change this doctrine. Rather, it developed it, deepened it, and more fully explained it. This was exactly what John the 23rd said at the beginning of the Council, And Paul VI affirmed it and commented in an act of promulgation, the Constitution, Lumen Gentium. There is no better comment to make than to say that this promulgation really changes nothing of the traditional doctrine. What Christ willed, we also will. What was, still is. What the church has taught down through the centuries, we still teach. In simple terms, that which was assumed is now explicit, that which is uncertain is now clarified, that which was meditated upon, discussed, and sometimes argued, however, is now put together in one clear formulation. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. One is always bound to follow the judgment of a properly informed conscience. The informing takes place in community by appealing to various sources of moral wisdom. In the church, the magisterial is a source of moral authority. So what the church bishops say, the magisterium, that's where the authority lies. Its teaching is a very important, though not exclusive, factor in the formation of conscience in one's moral judgment. To appeal to authority is part of responsible living. In appealing to an authority, we believe that it will be more correct about this question than we will, or than anyone else to whom we might appeal. The key text for understanding a loyal response to magisterial teaching is found in the papal encyclical, Lumen Gentium, point 25. This is what it says. In matters of faith and morals, the bishops speak in the name of Christ, and the faithful accept their teaching and adhere to it with religious assent of soul. In other words, they capitulate to it. They accept it. This religious submission of will and of mind must be shown in a special way to the authentic teaching authority of the Roman Pontiff, even when he is not speaking ex cathedra. Richard M. Gulag, Jesuit teaching. You will listen to the magisterium. You will listen to the Pope. You will agree with what he says. You will submit your will to that reasoning, even if he's not speaking ex cathedra. Did you get it? Who's the boss? The Pope. I thought there's such an openness that you can think what you want to think. No, no, no. You may only live if you obey. In my treatment of formation of conscience, I pointed out that character is formed in community by committing our freedom to a particular object of loyalty. I wonder who that particular object of loyalty could be. And I would have to go back to Ignatius Loyola and his spiritual exercises, where he says, because I cannot speak with Christ directly, I have to choose a substitute who is a ruler and has all these attributes which only the Pope has, and so I must be subject to him. And then by internalizing the images, the rituals, the traditions, etc., which the community has fashioned in order to carry the meaning attached to that object of loyalty. So in other words, like a brainless individual, I go through the liturgies and the rituals of the church, and I adhere to the doctrines of the church because the Pope said so. What does religious assent or submission of will and mind mean in moral matters? This is a modern Jesuit telling us what we must do and how we must think. Religious assent or submission means that such effort and appropriation are motivated by the conviction that Jesus has commissioned the church to teach and that the Spirit guides the church in truth. So what the church says is right. You will not argue with the church. Francis A. Sullivan, an ecclesiologist from the Gregorian University in Rome, another Jesuit institute, has analyzed this expression in his masterful work, The Magisterium, Teaching Authority in the Catholic Church, and offers this summary statement of its meaning. Why is it necessary for me to go through all of this? It's necessary for me to go through all of this because there are people in Protestant communities, my own not excluded, who believe that Rome has changed. And therefore we can sit in ecumenical council. What does this mean? What does this authority say? As I understand it then, to give the required obsequium religiosum. They use such nice names. To be obsequious is to be submissive to this religious authority. To the teaching of the ordinary magisterium means to make an honest and sustained effort to overcome any contrary opinion I might have and to achieve a sincere assent of my mind to this teaching. I will not think about it. I will make an effort to submit. How far do I go in this, Mr. Gula? The official text of the 1978 National Catechetical Directory, Sharing the Light of Faith, states, it is the task of catechesis to elicit assent to all that the Church teaches. For the Church is the indispensable guide to the complete richness of what Jesus teaches. When faced with the questions which pertain to dissent from non-infallible teaching of the Church, it is important for catechists to keep in mind that the presumption is always in favor of the magisterium. No matter what I may think, they're right. And then he has this marvelous statement. And you know, they have a way with words. They have a way with words because they have learning against learning, isn't that right? Only a system of tight syllogism. Do you know what that means? Only a system of tight syllogism, deductive reasoning, which leave no room for personal affective element. What is an affective element? My own feelings, my own emotion. Would come near guaranteeing certitude about knowing and doing what God requires and enables. This is a modern way, a brilliant modern way of saying perinde e cadaver, to be like a corpse, not to think, not to use your own mind when it comes to this issue. You obey the magisterium, you obey the Pope, you don't think for yourself. That's what it means, literally.